Welcome to Mental Stillness. My name is Derek, and I'm excited that somehow you stumbled across this podcast. One of my goals when starting this podcast was to bring mental health conversations into leadership circles. Every podcast touches on both leadership and mental health and also provides specific next steps. And this podcast is still fairly new. I just started it last November. As I continue to get more guests and provide more content that helps you and your leadership team, if you could take just a minute and go over to Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you're listening or viewing this, and just give me a rating and even leave a comment. The way the algorithms work, it just really helps this podcast get out to more people, and even share this with maybe someone who you feel like would benefit. Welcome to the third part of a three-part series called The Art of Motivation. In the prior two episodes, I really hope you listened to those. If you didn't, please go back. It'll give so much context and color to today's conversation. But we talked about autonomy, the first psychological need, when that has to do with I have the ability and I have the authority within my role, within my environment to create change. I can take ownership. There's a semblance of control that comes with that around my choices and my decision making. The second psychological need we touched on was competence. The fact that most of us, not all, but most of us desire to have this level of mastery in our role to where we're not only confident, but we're also capable. And today we're going to wrap all of that up with this conversation around relatedness. At a fundamental, foundational level, each and every one of us long to feel connected. And in this context, I'm not talking about being connected to a vision of the organization or connected to the values. This is actually being connected to people, flesh and blood. And so we're going to dive into that part of our conversation today. I was reflecting recently on my grandfather. He passed away over a year ago, and I'm sure many of you have been in the same situation where you go through a loved one's home after they've passed away and you're just flooded with memories. I remember standing in the kitchen, that very thing happened. Memories came back through the years, almost in rapid speed of just this conversation or that funny thing or this family gathering or this holiday. And when I'm standing in the kitchen, my eyes just kind of wander to the side door. And the house was built in a way to where the side door was really the main door. And so it kind of went out into the carport. I'm standing there, and as I'm looking at this side door, I see these hooks up on the wall. And my grandfather always had hats on these hooks. And so he had a rule. He was pretty old school, but he was a man of high character. He would not allow us to wear our hats at the dinner table. And I remember that was a very different rule when I was at their house versus when I was at my own house. But we all learned really quick that it was a rule and he also meant it. You would never see him eat with a hat on. Eventually you found out you had a hat on and you were reminded, and he wouldn't do it by yelling or screaming. He was incredibly witty and clever and a wordsmith, and he would just find an interesting way to draw attention to it. Sometimes that would be with a facial expression. Sometimes it would be with sarcasm, but he would always let us know, we're not going to start until that hat is off your head. And I remember as a kid, you think, man, these are just silly rules. What does it matter? The food's going to taste the same. What really changes by taking the hat off? And I go back to what I said about this hook right by the front door. For my grandfather, when he came in the house and put his hat on the hook, it's because that symbolized to him, it's time to be home. The only time he would grab a hat is if he was going out the door to leave the home, to leave the family. So if we had a hat on at the table, it was communicating to him that it was more important for us to be somewhere else and not be in the moment connecting with family. Because wearing a hat at the table symbolizes leaving. I love this picture and the way my grandfather modeled this because he demonstrated to us this desire for connection, this desire to relate to his grandkids. And that really taps into all of us. Each and every one of us have this desire within ourselves to be connected. This makes me think of the conversation I had in episode 12 with Dr. John Gore. He said that loneliness is an epidemic in the United States right now. And it's because a lot of people right now are starving for connection. So my first question is this: is your hat on the hook? To me, that question symbolizes I'm actively engaging, I'm actively and intentionally connected. I know there's periods of my life where this part has been stronger than others. It doesn't take me very long to realize when I don't have it. And I think that's the psychological need within myself that's raising its hand and saying, hey, you've got to figure this out because this is a core need that you have. I want to suggest this. There's absolutely people you grow apart from. You move to different areas, you start a new life, you start building a new story and a new season in a new city. But I also think there's something to be said that I think we all experienced. Growing up, going to school, spending year after year sitting in classrooms or sitting right next to people. And I think sometimes we thought it was a strong sense of community, but perhaps it was really just about proximity. And I think that we carry that over into our adulthood to where just because we're physically in proximity with someone else doesn't immediately mean that there's going to be ongoing, genuine connection or community. So let's shift gears to thinking about this through the lens of leadership and our workplace. I want to first start with sharing some of the negative outcomes if we do not have connectedness, if we don't have that genuine community I've been talking about. The first is there's a physiological response when we don't have this. There's ongoing research to support that the psychological need of community is directly linked to our physiological health. The research points to mortality being connected to this, that when you're isolated, when you don't have community, it can actually be one of the factors in our lifespan. And another physiological response to a lack of community is this: our body's ability to fight illness and disease lessens without this connection. I want to say this another way that hopefully helps drive the point home, and it's something that's easy to remember. As community decreases, our immunity decreases. So beyond the physiological implications, some of the social implications are also felt if we don't have genuine connection. Harvard has done some research on this, and they identify two key areas that I want to share with you today. The first being that when we don't have genuine community and genuine connection, we lose the ability to ask someone else to cover for us when we're in a bind. So instead of having people to lean on when the days get hard or the project seems beyond our capability, that becomes really difficult if we don't have genuine community to lean into. And they also say that you lose out on emotional support because you don't have the option of being able to talk through stress, change, or anxiety. I wanted to end this podcast with giving you some practical strategies for increasing community in the workplace. The first strategy would be to start small. If you're an introvert, or if this doesn't come natural to you and you get insecure or in your head around building connections, give yourself permission to start small. One way that you can start small is to capitalize on your breaks. A lot of people, when they go on break, they don't want to be around other people. They want to decompress. But I wonder if you wouldn't get just as much energy or more energy from sitting and having lunch with one other person. If you normally go to your car and eat, sit on a bench outside, or if you see a coworker eating lunch, ask if you can join them. Again, start small. This may feel like a big step, but it could end up being a great step for you. So maybe think about what are some ways that you can involve other people in things you're already doing. You're already going to eat lunch. Why not include one other person in that? I know some people who get really nervous about talking to someone that they don't know well or that they're not comfortable with yet. And I would say a great strategy for you might just be to take the pressure off of yourself that you're not going to have enough to say or that it's going to get awkward. And I think a great way to do that is to just lean heavily into curiosity. Make them the focal point of that conversation. Ask them questions about their family, their job, their life, and just see where the conversation goes. And as you get to know them more, my hope for you is that you'll find some connections and some entry points, and you'll realize that, hey, maybe they have some of the same aspirations or some challenges that you do, or you learn something fascinating about them. I try to do this, and so I'm not asking you to do something that I don't practice myself here. I really leverage curiosity, and it's such an interesting way for doors to open in conversation. Just the other day, I saw somebody that had an interesting shirt on and it had a cool design, and it seemed a little abstract, and so I just, out of curiosity, asked the person, I love your shirt. That's an interesting design. Does it mean something? And they went into this story about how their daughter designed this logo for an upcoming family trip they were going to go on. The whole family made shirts and they were wearing it, and it was abstract, but it had meaning. And so that was really a great conversation, but it all went back to just me being curious. And to be honest, I just kind of had to get the conversation started, and then they opened up and shared some of their story. And so for you, maybe leveraging curiosity, and what's something that you can actively lean into from a posture of curiosity and see what happens with it. If you are a remote worker, this presents some real challenges because, as you know, it's called remote for a reason. You're by yourself, sometimes isolated. And so I would schedule some times to be around people. Maybe you have a friend that also is remote and you could actually do your work together at a coffee shop. I think sometimes remote work can be very isolating. I've done that myself. I think scheduling time where you have built-in connection that's predictable can go a long way. So maybe you can link up with someone else who does remote work, and you all could have a mobile office, maybe at a coffee shop, or going to each other's homes and working from there just to be in community. But I would make sure that you had some standing time that was predictable and consistent to be around people if you happen to be a remote worker. The final question and the final challenge is this. It goes back to my story about my grandfather, and I just want to ask this question: is your hat on the hook? And again, that represents that I'm leaning into community. I'm leaning into genuine connection. My mind isn't in the future. It's in the present and being in the moment. So is your hat on the hook?